Morning, I hope you're all doing well. My name's David and I'm part of the team here at Mosaic Church. And it's great to have you joining us or listening to this, whatever time of day you're listening to us. And I don't know if you normally come to Mosaic Church or just started listening to these talks online over the last few months, but it's great to have you with us and we can't wait to connect with you in person when we're allowed to meet together. But in the meantime, you can contact us over social media or email, and we'll put some links in the description of this video below. So as a church, we've been walking through a series that we've called Wilderness Wanderings, looking at the people of Israel's time in the desert after leaving Egypt, where they had been enslaved, and how we can apply some of the lessons they've learned to our lives as we walk through COVID-19 and lockdown. And as I've been reading this story again this week, I've been struck afresh at how much there is in this Exodus story. Most of us may know the highlights from the story or bits of it from watching the film Prince of Egypt, but we often miss detailed parts of the story that are not often looked at. So if you've got your Bible with you to hand, we're going to be in Numbers 13 and 14 as we look at the passage today. So a bit of the background story before we read the section from the Bible. So God has told the people at this point in the story to go and spy out the land that he was giving them. So the people of Israel have sent out spies to spy out the land of Canaan, as God has told them to. They send out 12 spies, one from each tribe. The spies find that the land is good and flowing with milk and honey, but the people who currently occupy the land were big and strong people, so they feared them greatly. And when they return from spying out the land, they give their report to Moses, and they tell of how the land is good, but they would not be able to take it because of the people that live there are big and strong. So they decide to give a bad report to the people. Two of the spies, Caleb and Joshua, however, know that God has given them this land, and so that they are confident they are able to take it with God's help to take the land. But because they are outnumbered, they sort of get overlooked. And we pick up the story in Numbers 13, verse 32, and then we'll carry on reading into chapter 14. When the Bible was first written, it would have not had chapters and verses, but they were added in later to help find different parts. So I'll read from Numbers 13 and I'll start in verses 32. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land, though which we have gone to spy out, is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we see in it are of great height. And we saw the Nephilims, the son of Anak, who come from the Nephilims. We've seen to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them." Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night, and all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, Would that we have not have died in the land of Egypt, or would we have that we have died in the wilderness? Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by sword? Our wives and our little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And so they said to one another, Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. So if you know the story at all, or have been following these talks online, you may have seen a repeating pattern with the Israelites. The pattern where they question whether they would have been better to stay in Egypt as slaves. As they face different circumstances, they like to grumble. We see this many times in their journey through the wilderness. We see it when they first leave Egypt and come to the Red Sea. Here they first question if they had made the right call leaving, but God comes through for them and remains true to his promises. And again after they cross the sea, and they're in need of food and start to grumble again and question, would they have been better staying in Egypt? But God provides food for them again. And then straight after God provides them with food, they start to grumble about the lack of water again and question, have we been brought out of Egypt just to die here? But God provides for them again. So I was in Manna early one morning this week reading this passage in prep for this message. And Rachel Hunter popped into Manna and she asked what I was reading. And when I said the Exodus story, she asked were they having a good day or a bad day? And my response was, it never seems to be going right for them. They always seem to be having a bad day. But every time they come through against a problem, every time they seem to be having a bad day, God has always provided. Every time they grumble, God has come through for them. In every circumstance, God provided for them. What may have started as a bad day, God uses to show his power and remind them of who he is. And even as people just reading this story, it's easy to forget the amount of times that God has come through for them. So here are some of the times he has provided for them in the past in the wilderness. So they came against the sea. God split the sea and dried it up. Egyptian army chasing them. God drowns the army in the sea. Bitter water, God made the water sweet. Lack of food, God provides manna. Bored of manna, God provides meat. Lack of water, God provides water from a rock. Amalek come and fight against them, God provides victory in battle. Moses lifts his hands up in prayer. And when he lifts his hands up in prayer, they win the battle. And when he starts to lower them, they start to lose. And when he gets tired, his mates come around him and lift his hands for him. And there's a lesson to be learnt there about having good friends and mates around you. These are just a few times where God's people have grumbled or faced trials. But in all the times I've just mentioned above, God provides and reminds them of who he is. So the people have been through a lot and seen God time and time again come through for them. So we picked up the story today when they are on the edge of the land that God has told them to go and possess. God tells them to go check it out. Go send some of your leaders to check out this great land that I have for you. And he tells them to bring back some of the fruit of the land and to bring a report of it. So 12 spies go off and spy out the land, and they see that it is good land. It flows with milk and honey. And the spies come back and report that indeed it is good land, but they found a problem. The people who currently dwell in the land are strong people. They are large people. And they looked like grasshoppers to them, and they felt like grasshoppers. And they come back and said, we are not strong enough to take this land. Apart from two of the spies, Caleb and Joshua, who come back with a different view though. Yes, it is good land, and yes, the people are strong and big, but our God is bigger and we can take it. But Caleb and Joshua are outnumbered by the others, and so the others go and give a bad report to the people. And the people again grumble and look to choose a new leader to take them back to Egypt, where they had been enslaved. So 10 of the spies come back saying, great land, big people, no way. 2 of the spies, Caleb and Joshua, come back, great land, big people, bigger God. The lack of faith of the people this time leads them not being the generation that would inherit the land, but it would be their sons and daughters that would inherit the land. Only Caleb and Joshua would remain from that generation to see them enter into the land. And in chapter 14 verse 3 we read the people saying this, why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and little ones will become prey. It's interesting here that the people believe that their children will become prey to the people of this land, yet God has other plans. It would be their children that would inherit the land some 40 years later. Instead of their children becoming prey, God gave the children the land to inherit. So the 10 spies that came back initially and gave a bad report end up dying of plague before the Lord. And at this point in the story, some of the Israelites and some of the people of Israel start to think, well, God has promised us this land. we should just go up and take it. So they go up in battle to take the land. But at this point, they're going up in their own strength. And Moses and the Ark of the Covenant, which is the place where the presence of God dwelt, remained in the camp, and the people were defeated. They tried to use their human strength rather than looking to God. So looking back at this story, it's easy for us to sit there and think, how could they not have trusted God? He did all that stuff for them. Surely they should have trusted him. He did all that amazing stuff for them. He split the sea. He gave them bread and meat each day. He poured water out of a rock. He's shown his power so many times to them. The trouble is, we are forgetful people. And I'm not talking about when you go to the shops and you forget what you've gone for. But we easily forget the good things that have happened and can easily focus on the negatives. The circumstances we find ourselves in cloud our judgment. You see it all the time in football. A player only needs to have 1 or 2 bad games and the fans forget all the stuff that he has done previously for them. And they start to call for him to be dropped from the team or sacked. As a forgetful people, we need to be people who remind ourselves daily, and maybe even more than just daily, maybe hourly, of God's goodness to us, of his faithfulness towards us. I wonder if you can think of times where your first response was not to bring it to God in prayer, but to have a grumble at someone. Or maybe there's promises that God has given you that you have forgotten about. Maybe it'd be good for you this week to write down areas where you've seen God come through and answer your prayers. Remind yourselves of times when you've seen God break through. I know some people like to write down their prayers in books like a diary, and then they can go back and remind themselves of what they prayed for and how God has answered their prayers. Maybe that's something you want to start look at doing. I'm sure we can all think of areas in our lives where we have been like the spies who have given a bad report of the land and not fully placed our trust in God, where we've looked at the circumstance rather than God, who is bigger than the circumstance. So when the church first took over the running of the Manor House Community Centre, there was many times where we had to stop and remind ourselves that God had spoken about giving us a building. At times it looked like it wasn't going to happen, and at this point it would have been very easy just to walk away from it and throw in the towel. Scott had been to numerous amounts of meetings and put in business plans to the council, but it didn't seem to be going anywhere. He also had edited the business plans many times to fit in with what the council were asking for. I remember sat in a meeting where we all agreed we knew God had spoken about giving us a place, giving us the building, but we had to place it into his hands. We had done what we were able to do. We just had to trust that God had spoken and that he would make it happen. We needed to trust that Jesus was fighting the battle on our behalf, and we needed to stand firm and see God at work, like we looked at a few weeks ago. And we didn't then go off and do anything in our own strength. We sort of just put it into God's hand, and well, I'm stood in Manor House now recording this message, so God came through and provided the building for us. There are other stories in the Bible where we see the people of God not having faith in him and look at circumstances. I'm reminded of David and Goliath, where the army were afraid of Goliath, but David comes up to the battlefield and has faith that God would help him win the battle. He fixes his eyes on the bigness of God rather than the bigness of Goliath. And we also see the disciples not having full faith in Jesus at times. We see this when Peter walks on the water, and we find this story in Matthew 14, and we'll pick it up in verse 25. So at this point, the disciples are out on a boat without Jesus. And we read from Matthew 14, verse 25. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "Is it a ghost?" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come and walk on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and he began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when he got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So Peter starts out by placing his faith in Jesus and asking him to call him out to walk on the water with him. And it starts all right for Peter while he's got his eyes on Jesus. He gets out of the boat and he starts walking on the water. But then Peter takes his eyes off Jesus and onto the wind and the rain and the circumstances that he finds himself in, and he starts to sink. Like the people of Israel, Peter had taken his eyes off Jesus, placed their eyes on the circumstance rather than Jesus. Where is your faith placed? Is it in Jesus, or is it in the circumstance you find yourself in? While we've been in lockdown and are still in lockdown in Leicester, have we been grumbling, or have we been leaning into Jesus, keeping our eyes fixed on him, keeping our eyes lifted to the King of Kings? He has already won the victory for you. Don't miss out on what God has for you during this season. Place your faith in him and don't look at the circumstances. This week, remind yourself of victories he has already won for you. The house you live in, the friends you have, the food you have on your table, the job you have. Let's not be people who forget what Jesus has already done. And as we draw to a close, I'd just like to pray for us. Yeah, Jesus, would you let us not be people who forget your faithfulness towards us, about the victories you have already won for us, and about promises you have for us. We do not want to miss out on what you have for us. We're sorry for when we have grumbled and have brought stuff to you and not brought stuff to you in prayer, or our faith has not been fully in you, and we start to make stuff try and happen ourselves, or make the situation bigger than the God we serve. We want to be people who place our faith in you, even when the circumstances don't look like they're going our way. Would you remind us that you fight for us? And let us come out of lockdown leaning into more of you. Yeah, let us be people who know your faithfulness towards us and have faith that you will come through, even though the situations and circumstances may not look like they're going our way. Let us always keep our eyes and our gaze lifted to you, the King of Kings. Amen.